Good evening, and welcome to another episode of The Fire Caves, a Star Trek Deep Space Nine podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Perry.
So I'm your host, David. Tonight we're talking about Season 6, Episode 12, Who Mourns for Morn? Before we continue, you can find us on Facebook, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube as The Fire Caves, a Star Trek Deep Space Nine podcast.
That is correct. And as I say every single week, you should find us and follow us because we are a pretty good time. We are enjoying getting through this show, and we're actually almost done. We're to the halfway point of season 6 now. And just a little bit of housekeeping on all of that. I know I had said last week about some of the episodes not uploading for us early on and having to re upload them. And I think I explained it a little bit incorrectly. So you're not going to be getting like one new episode and then one old episode. All the episodes are going to come out in order, but they're just going to be on a slight delay. So if you're following us along live on YouTube, this episode will technically come out a couple of weeks after the other ones come through. But I'm trying to speed up the process, so there may be a couple of weeks where you get like two, maybe even three episodes, depending on how far behind they are in the timeline. And I'm just having to watch it like a hawk and everything to make sure they get through. But then once that happens and we're all caught up, then everything will be back on its regular release time, and there shouldn't be any other issues. So that being said, I think right now episode 4 came out. So then what's slated to be next are episodes 5, 6, and 7. So you might get all those in the next week. You might get two one week, and the next week you'll get 7 and 8. It's just the algorithm is weird because I'm trying to force them through to get everything released that we're caught up. So just bear with me when it comes. So you might just have a week where you get 3 hours of us, or really it's more like you might get like 5 hours because some more episodes run over,
Right.
whatever. But suffice to say, all of them are here. We have everything. Just bear with me. I promise we didn't skip anything, and we'll get to it. All right.
Sounds good.
Now, before we jump into our regular episode for tonight, we always like to do a bit of a check in here. So, David, how has your week been?
Week's been fine. Still reading Shogun. It's going to take me a bit longer because the book is, as I said, pretty thick. It's about 1,300 pages according to the version I have. And I'm about 700 pages in right now, and that means
Hmm.
still got like 2 weeks left probably of time on that. Um, but it's been fun to read because the show did a good job of following the plot of the book, but slimming it down where it needed to.
Hmm.
And there are like ever so slight moderations to certain characters, like it is the character from the book and they are doing things the character in the book did, but sometimes the actor did not play the character as the book would seem to indicate the role would have been played if it had followed the book a little bit more. I'm talking more about like the secondary characters, not like the
Hmm.
primary characters. But anyway, otherwise this has just been a fun read, really well written book. Japanese culture in 1600 is the setting, and it's just very different than modern American culture in
Yeah.
multiple ways. And so to read, I mean, I would be very curious to hear what a Japanese person thinks about. And it was an English author writing a book about characters like the main character is an Englishman who gets it crash lands on Japan on in Japan, and his experiences there. And I'm
Hmm.
curious what I mean. My understanding is that Japanese people are proud of the show and that it
Yeah,
was
I
well
was
done.
I was actually going to say if you watched, or they did the what was it, the Emmys, I think
I was
recently,
about to say,
and that
yep,
show was nominated and won several, and it was praised.
18
Yeah,
total. Yeah,
it was praised for its accuracies and for the portrayals of
right.
the Japanese characters and cultures and so forth.
Yeah,
So I did not watch all the Emmys. I tried not to. I just like catch little snippets,
yeah.
here and
Catch
there.
the
But
highlights. Yeah,
yeah, I could never sit through that whole thing. I just don't like it. But I catch the little bits and pieces here and there. And the show was nominated for a lot. It won a lot, and that
it
was
did.
one of the consistent praise I heard through it was not just accuracies for the actors and the cultural portrayal, but also how closely they stuck to the original source material. There was a lot of praise for that as well. So
Yeah,
it made for a very compelling case to both read the book and watch the show.
yeah.
So I've kind of put that on my list as well.
Yeah, yeah, definitely both. If you don't get time to for the book, the show is definitely worth it. I am curious to see how well they kept to it up to the end. Because I'm about like if I were going, there are 10 episodes in the show, and I would say I'm about like episode 6 ish in the book right now. So there's
Mhm.
still a good bit far further to go. But as I said in my first, like I think 2 weeks ago when I first started reading it, the first like 2 to 300 pages were like all that what happened in episode one. So they like blasted through the first 300 pages for the show. They're like, we got places to go, places to be. We don't got time for the
Mm.
slow conversations. No, we got to get places. But even then, they still overall managed to keep a lot of the story going, which is great. Other than that, nothing much else going on. Work is it's interesting, but I won't talk about it. It just is what it is. So, how about
So
you?
now, so real quick about the Shogun.
Yeah,
Uh, is it a book series or is it just one book?
it's interesting. So the author, whose name is James Clavell, he wrote this book is a standalone book in the sense that none of his other writings, as far as I understand it, follow up on this one in terms of plot.
Okay.
However, it is considered the first of his Asian series, or I don't know if that's quite the right word, but he's written other books like Guy Jin and King Rat and Noble House, and they are all about some Asian, like Hong Kong or something. And I have not read those books or the plots very well. I don't know all what goes on, but they are other books that are something about like it's about Hong Kong in
Okay.
1765. What that
Okay.
means, I can't say, but yeah, he definitely had like a theme. I would say like he had a genre for himself: historical fiction from the perspective of like English person in Asian cultures hundreds of
Yeah.
years ago. So yeah,
Well, I
I
mean,
yeah.
it's an interesting perspective, but definitely one that we know would have happened. The first time as cultures meet and clash and experience things and so forth. I mean, it's definitely something that had to have happened at one point or another. So, yeah, I mean, an interesting thing to write from, and then to get it right
Hmm.
is the crucial part. Because I
Correct.
mean, this is not the first time that these kind of stories have been told in any regard, but often what we find with some of the other ones is there's a lot of exaggeration, and the context of things skewed in such a way to perhaps favor one over the other or to elevate one over the other. So to have one that's just more of a very direct, accurate portrayal, this is kind of that kind of perspective on it, I think is um very unique and refreshing. And I'm looking
Correct.
forward to looking at um both the show and reading the book. So, because yeah, I
Yeah.
definitely put on my list now. Um,
I will.
yeah.
The one thing I did learn about James Clavell, the author, is apparently, I think one of the books, like the last of the books in terms of history, like if you're going chronologically through just the years, Shogun is 1600, and every other book happens in years after that, say 1765. But one of them is, I guess, closer to like the World War II era. I'm not sure exactly if that's quite
Mhm.
right, but the point is that he was someone who was captured during World War II, and I don't know the details, but he was a prisoner in the Philippines or something at some point during World War II, and that inspired part of at least one of his books. I think King
Okay.
Rat, which is
So
about
this is an older author then.
he's dead. Yeah, he's passed away.
So he
Yes.
wrote these a while ago, and they're kind of just
This book, Shogun, was written, if I remember correctly, or it came out in 1975, and there
hmm,
was a TV show, I think, in like the 80s. I don't know any details about the other show, but this is actually the current show is the second version, the second
like a
TV
reimagining.
version, correct, of
Okay.
the show. Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah. Anyway, it's really well written. It's really fun. Um, the characters are all deep, and it's great. It's a good thing I watched the show first in some ways, because keeping track of the names of characters and who's who and what's what is much easier on a show because you can recognize faces.
Hmm.
As names, sometimes you're like, I remember seeing that name somewhere, but I don't know what page it was, and I can't flip to it to remember what that character did. So anyway, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. How about you? What have you been up to?
My week's been pretty good. Nothing new on the work front or anything like that. But I have been making my way, of course, through our, uh, the
Yeah.
Expanse, our
Yes.
continued series here. Should be finishing this book up pretty soon, and
Great.
then I think that we had discussed after we do our whole breakdown of this book, of course, taking a break and maybe doing, was it Count of Monte Cristo? I think. Um,
At some point, I definitely would love to do
yeah,
it.
yeah.
Let me go ahead and propose this. Do we want to finish the Expanse, because I know you and I are both probably chomping at the bit to get done, and then
Yeah,
do the Count of Monte Cristo as a grand finale along with the show? Like, we both read the Count of Monte Cristo and
okay.
finish up Deep
Finish
Space
up.
Nine.
Okay, we could do
Yeah,
that. We could do
yeah,
that. But yeah, I have really been enjoying it. I have been enjoying the way that this book really, is even though it's very much still the same world that we've come to know through the other six books. There is a lot. It's almost like you're getting a new round of world building because this is set, 30 years later, and you're kind of having to reacquaint yourself with who the key players are, and having to accept the fact that the people that you've come to really like aren't necessarily the star every time. You still get a lot of them, don't get me wrong, but it's different because they're acknowledging the fact that, they're older and they can't always do everything. And so they need other people. And, there's a whole thing in there about how it's kind of hard to trust because you've been so used to these people for so long. And now you're having to rely on other people just simply due to the fact that they are, younger and able to, do stuff. So I like kind of this transition that, some of the stuff is in. So, um, and then of course you have the introduction of the new big bad, and
ooh,
trying to understand their motivations. And so many times I've been reading it and just being like, so because I'm like, are they crazy, or are they being influenced, or are they making just enough sense? Like, where is it? Because as deep as I am in the book, I still don't feel like I've gotten to a point where I'm feeling like, okay, um this person is truly awful,
right,
like you could do with so many other villains. They've done a great job of giving you such complex characters that it makes it hard to pin them down.
right,
And even with the initial things of being like, oh well, they attacked so and so and they're making this kind of demand, but when you get the perspective of the characters and the reason that they're doing what they're doing, it's kind of like, well, I mean, that kind of makes sense. It's on a grander scale, perhaps, but this still makes sense. And it made me think of Battlestar Galactica a lot because one of the main, I guess, kind of becomes a main villain to a certain degree in that show. The reimagined series that came out in the 2000s, of course, was the character of Tom Zarek. And he was a prisoner, political prisoner, turned kind of this renegade character. And a lot of the arguments that he made a lot of sense. And
yes,
so that's what made him such a compelling character, because it was like you wanted to hate him, and he definitely did some very, deceitful, disrespectful things. But when he explained it and when he talked about, like, you know the way that the world is and how people are acting and operating and not realizing the severity of their situation, it made a lot of sense. So there's just elements of that in this story that I'm really enjoying as well. I like a complex villain. I don't like it when
yeah,
it's too cut and dry,
right,
for us to pick up on. So
right,
I like that they've got elements of that in here, and I'm looking forward to, like you said, the next few books to see where they go with it, because it's very clear that the problem that they've started in the seventh book, there's no way they're going to resolve it by the end. Like I said, I'm going to finish this book really soon, and
right,
there's no real solution. I
right.
will say my only critique of the book so far is that I still don't have what I feel is enough proto molecule. Now, maybe they're saving it. Maybe I'm going to see that in like the next couple of chapters, and it's just going to be this overflow. But that you know, uh, extra element that has always been kind of floating around in the story.
Right.
I feel like we've become so far removed from it and the implications
Mm,
behind it that it almost is irrelevant. And so
mm.
I'm waiting for it to come back, and I want it to come back, and I want it to come back in a really big way.
Yeah.
So if we don't have it in this book, book 8
Yeah.
has to give me a lot because there's
Yeah.
only 9 books.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna need them to really, really kind of go into all that and
Yeah.
what's happened and everything else. So we'll see.
So here's the $1 million question, and we'll have to save it also for whenever we do our behind or after dark for the book.
Mhm.
But I'll ask it now too. Do you think the show was right to wait? Like right now the show has ended. It's
Mhm.
a complete series. They did 6 seasons based on the first 6 books. Do you think that it was right? Like the plot wouldn't have worked if they had just jumped into book 7/season 7? Does the time gap require the characters to be older? Or do you think that if they had fudged it and said, "Oh, it's been 10 years. Our actors don't look that much older, but it's
Um,
been 10 years."
that's a well, that's a good question, but I'm gonna say no. I don't think that's necessary. It's only necessary really for one character, and that's Avasarala, because she's still in this one, and the 30-year gap makes that one kind of hard to believe because we already know that she was so much older than everyone else. So now she's got another 30 years on her. And they've made references to the fact that, medical science has improved drastically, and she's had some things done to her to help ease her mobility and so forth. So they make it to where it's perfectly acceptable that she's
Right.
still up and doing things and viable and so forth. She's just retired, but still has a lot of influence. But for the sake of for the TV show, if they just wanted to be like, 10 years later or 15 years later, kind of split the difference, it still would have worked, and they could
Okay.
still have continued on with the
Mhm.
show. Um, the age references that they make are just, I guess they stand out to me because I don't know. I guess I have become a little age obsessed as I've aged, so I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. So pointing when I hear these things, and like Bobby, for example, our Marine, who is so used to being this, force of nature, and she's having to really reconcile with the fact that she's older, and while she still feels like she can really do a lot of these things, she has to, acknowledge the wear and tear on herself and how things hurt more than they used to, and then she's still got a lot of old injuries that didn't heal right now. She's on the other side of those, and and stuff like that. So um having them be 30 years older versus maybe 15 years older, where that wouldn't be affecting her as much, that is a little thing that we could probably quickly gloss over in a television show. Whereas the book, it lends itself to a lot of the developments of other things throughout the book. So I don't know. Um, I still just want them to go ahead and do the show.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
do I think that Amazon or whomever is being incredibly smart by letting the show stay off the air for several years and then gonna bring it back in order to stay true to form? No, I don't. I want you to continue now.
can you
Give
imagine
me the
if
whole
they
thing.
waited 30 years and then, "Hey guys."
Oh, I can imagine how pissed off I would be because certain characters would most
Mm.
certainly not be there. I would be significantly older,
Well, I mean, it's what
and
Picard did in some ways, right?
yeah, but that was different. I was a kid then, so there.
Yeah, yeah.
They
Well, here's
couldn't
hoping still. I
Yeah,
mean,
they
honest.
couldn't wait. They couldn't wait another 30 years and do Picard. Everybody would be gone. So
They literally did wait till the last minute as it is, right?
seriously. They were as pretty much a do it, yeah, now or never, because no one's going to be, viable here soon.
Right.
So also, I went and did some wine tasting this weekend with
Oh,
my sister and some various friends and people that were around from, she owns this wine bar, and so they took me to do that, and I'd never really done that before, so that was an experience. We went down to a town called Fredericksburg. It's about what, an hour and a half, 2 hours from here, a little German town kind of mock up, but all along the way, there's a bunch of different wineries and stuff like that out here, which I was kind of surprised to see because I didn't realize that Texas had such a huge, winery, culture or
Scene.
whatever. Yeah, scene culture, whatever you want to call it. So that was interesting to do. I my only complaint was it was a little bit warmer. Because Texas has such a fluctuating heat thing. For a while we had some spectacularly cool temperatures. It didn't get above like 75. Then of course we're going to do this thing and it's like 95 degrees and we're outside and walking around and everything else. I was like, man, we if this had been something that we did in like November when it was definitely cooler, when it will be definitely cooler, I should say, it would have been a very a pleasant trip. But that's not to say I did not have a good time. I really
Right.
did. I enjoyed meeting all the people and trying all the wines. I am in no way any kind of wine expert. I can sip it and say this one tastes good or that one's not my, particular whatever. But if
Right.
you're wanting me to like name them and talk about the notes and all that, sorry, not your guy. I
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
know any of that.
Gotcha.
So and then like learning how to do the whole tasting thing was also a pretty interesting experience. So I enjoyed that. But other than that, it's been pretty good here. So I'm really just glad to be back. I've just been all of this stuff, of course, occurred over just these last few days, so I was a little bit worn out and couldn't get to this. This is why we're doing this show a little differently
Yeah.
this week. But we'll be back on it, and so don't worry,
Yeah.
we're here. But we're not here to talk about all those things. We're here to talk
Well,
about
actually, there was
more.
one thing I forgot to
Oh,
mention. Just
go
brief.
ahead. Yeah.
Obviously, anyone who can see me behind me, I have my Transformer collection. And the Transformers One movie came out this past weekend. It didn't do. It did okay at the box office. It got the number two slot, but the number one slot was from Beetlejuice, which had already been out already. So it didn't do as well as it was supposed to, but it was great. It's a great movie, and it's definitely has more of a like a kid friendly vibe in terms of the animation.
Mhm.
But the plot is like, how did Optimus Prime become Optimus Prime? How did Megatron become Megatron? If they were friends when they were younger, how did they become mortal enemies?
Uh-huh.
And the fall of D16 into becoming Megatron was actually really well done. It was funny though because I definitely felt like they were trying to make sure they didn't go too long with the movie. Like they didn't have like a 2 hour long movie that was way too much. Keep it close to an hour and a half. And so, in order to do that, they might have maybe had to cut a few small scenes to just make it fit, because there were definitely moments where I was like, it feels almost a little bit jittery in terms of like getting the character to his evil self, and not like it doesn't make sense. It just means like they
You could.
weren't able to smooth out every rough patch in
I was
order
gonna
to
say
get
you could
there.
you could tell there was something missing right
Yeah, there
here.
were a few. I imagine there's a scene here, a scene there that had to be, like if there's a director's cut. Maybe we'll see like
Mm,
15 more minutes worth of story, and that fills in maybe a few things. But otherwise, it was a good time. If you have kids, if you like the Transformer series like I do, then I say it's a good time. So yeah. Anyway, that was my last thing. I just realized
okay.
I'd forgotten to mention it. It's the
No, that's fine. That's
one
fine.
thing. So
So as I said, though, we're not here to talk about all that. We are here
nope,
to talk about who mourns for Morn.
that's right.
A I guess this would be the first bottle episode that we've had for season 6 now. Everything else has been in some way related to whatever came before it. Would you like to do the recap here? Or do you want me to do it?
It's probably my turn. I don't know. Is it my turn?
Fire
Okay,
away. That
let's
works.
go for it. All right. So who mourns for Morn? Well, Quark does, right? Well, at least it's a Quark-centered episode. Quark finds out that Morn has been killed in an ion storm, and he is definitely distraught over that because he feels that Morn brought things, brought the bar together. People miss the ever loquacious and talkative and always just chatterbox Morn, because we all know that Morn, the character, just can't stop talking. Every scene we've had him in, he has been silent and untalk and just not talking. And for whatever reason, we always miss this wonderful character whenever the camera finally manages to show up. But anyway, Morn is dead. He died in an ion storm, and fortunately for Quark, Morn left everything to him. Now, Cork is very happy about this because he thinks that that must mean he has some sort of windfall coming his way, but it doesn't look like it. Instead, when he goes to Morn's quarters to try and figure out what he had, he just finds a woman who says she was Morn's ex wife, and that he apparently had 1,000 bricks of gold pressed latinum saved up as an retirement policy.
Hmm.
No one's ever mentioned this before, but hey, Cork is all about that gold press latinum. And so he and Mourn's ex-wife, whose name is Laurel, decide that they will work together to find out what happened to it, and he'll give her 10% of the gold press latinum. But he knows. He says to, I believe it's Odo later, that he knows that she's not to be trusted. There's just something off about her. She's too much femme fatale to be anything other than a bad time when it comes down to it. Uh, but unfortunately for Cork, he is confronted by two brothers, Crit and Nosik, and they come saying that Morn was their business associate and that he owed them about 1,000 bricks of gold pressed latinum, which is very convenient. And unfortunately, it was a contract by word of mouth, not by actual, like, piece of paper. So they have to negotiate it down to 50-50. Uh, Cork will keep 500 bricks and the brothers will split the remaining 500. Now, unfortunately for Cork, when he is talking with Crit and Nasik about this, the one thing that he did really seem to inherit from Morn, a painting, is broken over Cork's head at one point. And in that painting, Cork finds a a key to a locker on the station. And going to Odo to get the locker shown to him, it opens up to reveal a gold pressed latinum, one brick of gold pressed latinum, and it also has the storage locker of a or a bank number for a bank on another planet. And so Cork knows that he just needs to ask the bank to send him the gold pressed latinum. Unfortunately, Laurel, who confronts him, steals the brick from him, but he doesn't care too much because, what's one brick against 1,000? And so he
Hmm.
goes to his quarters to call up the bank. But someone else is in his quarters, a man named Hain, who says that he is a security officer from Morn's home planet. And it turns out that Morn actually was a prince. He was a foreign prince, an alien prince, but he decided he didn't want to take up the become king. And so his agreement of basically turning down his royal blood or whatever was that he would get 1,000 bricks of gold pressed latinum as basically a security, a way for him to quietly go his own way. But now that he's dead, that is property of the royal family, and therefore the gold pressed latinum is actually the property of the royal family. Hain, this man, is there to collect the gold pressed latinum. And when he learns that, oh, it turns out that Laurel is on the station, and he claims that she is a criminal, he says, you know what, we'll use the money as a basically as a way to kind of bait her out, and so he can capture her. And he promises Cork a reward of some kind, and Cork is
Yeah.
like, all right, fine, great. However, shortly later, Cork is once again in his quarters, and not only do Laurel and Hain, but also Crit and Nazik, all four of them confront him in his quarters about the money. And they reveal that all four of them were actually all a part of a crew with Morn that had stolen the gold press latinum in a bank robbery 9 years ago. And only about 2 weeks ago did the statute of limitations finally expire. And so now they can actually make use of the gold press latinum without fear of prosecution. So Cork persuades them to go ahead and split the money 5 ways as they originally agreed. Cork will get Mourn's 20%. The others can all have their 20%. Because Cork is the one who has the thumbprint that is necessary to take possession of the gold press latinum when it arrives on the station. However, as one can imagine, when they finally get down to the area where the money is, where the gold press latinum is, turns out that the four turn on each other, get into a firefight over the gold press latinum. Cork jumps into the vault where the gold press latinum is and avoids being shot. Odo, having kept an eye on Cork the whole time, arrives in time to arrest the four before they kill each other. But Quark, in the meantime, learns that all of the gold pressed latinum has all of the latinum extracted, and the gold itself inside, in the future, of course, of Deep Space Nine and the Federation, is utterly useless. It's just gold powder as far as he's concerned. And so Quark has to sadly return to his position of just running the bar, only to find who else but Morn walk in finally and take his seat. He had faked his death, and it turns out that in his second stomach, because apparently Morn had two stomachs, he had somehow managed to store and keep all of that latinum inside his body for 9 years, which, for example, explains how he lost his hair. And he spits up a little bit of it for Quark in a glass. And while it only looks to be an ounce or two to us, Quark estimates that it's 100 bricks worth of latinum. And so, yeah, that means that Quark actually did come out a little bit ahead in this episode. So, yeah, did I miss anything, Perry?
No, that's essentially it. Those are the highlights there, and of course, we're going to get into it and talk about all the other details here. But before we do that, just overall, what did you think of this particular episode?
So this is a Quark centric episode, which, as we mentioned, only like 2 episodes ago, we had the other one, right, where he was,
The Magnificent Ferengi.
yeah, that was only like, I guess it was 2 episodes ago because we had Waltz last time, and then we had the Magnificent Ferengi before that. Um, so yeah, it's it's good to see Quark get some action because all of the Fed or the Dominion stuff doesn't always get a chance to focus on Quark very much. And Quark, I mean, Armin Zimmerman is Quark always. He's always kills it. I will
Mhm.
say that in some ways it feels, in some ways, Quark centric episodes are a little bit kind of predictable in the sense that he wants money. He wants to go the gold press latinum somehow, and he needs to work with shady characters to do something, and it usually blows up in his face in some way that he doesn't get the gold press platinum he expected. But in the end, he does get away with at least some. He does come away ahead in some capacity. I'm not going to say that every time, of course, but yeah, in some ways, it's really. I mean, they this episode really puts a pin on the Morn character. Morn has been in the background since literally the first episode. We've never seen him say anything. We never have had him interact with anyone, as far as we can tell, other than make some gestures with his hands. And yet, every character, especially in this episode, talks about how he likes to ramble and tell stories, and how you know he held the bar together. We all need to sit in his seat and keep it warm, as Quark says. The funny part of that scene is it's such an obvious ploy to keep people in the bar, and yet
Mhm.
Kira is like, "Oh, there are times when Quark surprises me." I'm like, "Come on, Kira, you know Quark better than that. You know he's using this just a way to get people in the bar." I mean, as much as he might have loved Morn, let's not pretend like this is anything much more than just a ploy to keep people down and getting drinks. Um,
So, funny thing about that particular scene, after Quark gives his big speech and he pulls that random person down and sets him into the seat, the actor that he pulls down to sit in the seat is actually the guy who plays Morn, just outside of the makeup. So Morn is still sitting in Morn's seat.
yeah,
Um,
I
I
read.
thought that was a nice little wink and nod that they
Yes.
do in there.
Yeah, the
For the
actor's name
moment.
is Mark Allen Shepard, and
Hmm.
I read that little detail on Wikipedia before we started the episode tonight, and I almost wish I'd had a chance to go back and quickly look at that scene again, just to get a visual on the guy. But Yeah, apparently that was Morn. We found Morn briefly in this episode, but
Yeah.
only
w-
those who knew what they were looking at actually knew what they were looking at.
Yeah. So this is a very unique episode in the sense that it's a full-on episode about a background character. So this is not something that happens that often. Morn was always a character that was supposed to just, like I said, be a background character. He doesn't have many speaking lines. He's just more of a fixture than anything else. But the odd fan popularity that Morn generated over the 6 seasons is kind of what got them wanting to do an episode with him. They had thought about doing one earlier on, but couldn't really figure out how to do it. And then by the time they got around to actually doing one, they were so deep into this more never talks that
Yeah,
it was, how can we possibly do an episode about a character that never speaks? Or at least never speaks on camera. That's kind of the other running joke, is that Morn is famously silent on camera, but off camera he never shuts up. So how can you work with something like that? Of
right.
course, this kind of makes it to where the episode goes to be less about Morn and more about Quark, and we are getting, how Quark's, greed kind of gets in the way of, you know, everything else, and hijinks ensue trying to um, collect on this um, inheritance, reward, lottery, whatever it is that the person's talking about at the time. I do like the fact that they introduce these other characters, Hain, Nozick, and Laurel, and so forth, and that each of them had a different perspective on the character of Morn. Because um, we, as much as we've seen Morn, we don't know really a whole lot about Morn. So it was great to be like, we just thought of him as this kind of, we know he's a traveler of some kind. He's got some kind of business, obviously, because he comes to Quarks, spends money, and takes up a post, but we don't know what he does. So when we first get the story of, oh, he's married and he was in business, and no, he's not a businessman, he's the crown prince or the abdicated prince or whatever. It was great to have these like fantastical stories about someone that you feel like but
Hmm.
really don't.
Yeah.
So I really like the way that they kind of threw all those things in there, and each one of them could have been plausible, only for it to turn out that actually they were all bank robbers and
Yeah.
in it for the money. So
Yeah.
it's just a nice way to kind of give you a bunch of different things to focus on to figure out which one is true until we finally get, of course, the big reveal.
Right.
And now, original post, or I guess original thoughts for this episode were that, one, this was going to be about, again, Morn disappearing and the rest of the crew banding together to go and find him. But again, the more they bantered that around, the more they realized it didn't really make a whole lot of sense, because while again Morn is seen as a fixture, we never really see him interacting with our regular crew members. So they were trying to come up with a reason that they would want to go after Morn, and then the episode was even going to play into that a little bit of how, despite their dedication to finding this guy, they really don't know that much about him.
Mm.
So then they just felt like that was going to be too much of a more of a flat show and trying to make that reasoning work. So
Right.
they dropped that entirely. There was also a discussion of actually legitimately killing Morn and him being dead.
Right.
But that's when it was pointed out that you can't do that because he has become a fixture and kind of an unofficial mascot of Deep Space Nine, and you
Right.
can't kill your mascot, which is actually a line that's later used in the episode, that Morn is the mascot of Quarks, and people expect to see him there. And business was on a downward spiral whenever Morn goes away for prolonged periods of time. So they like to work all those things in to make for a very compelling background character.
Right.
So, um, but I like so much of this episode for odd reasons, because if you think about it, I mean, it really doesn't make sense with anything else that we've got going on in the overall arc of this season. Even the Magnificent Ferengi, which almost could have been a standalone episode or a bottle episode, wasn't, because it directly references the Dominion and the Vorta and their need for having their people back while this war is going on, and the importance of Ishka to the Grand Nagus, and and affecting Ferengi commerce and so forth. So even that episode, at least indirectly related to the greater arc and theme of what we had going on so far. This one doesn't. It has
Yeah.
no ties to anything.
You could
There's not
pop
even
this episode in literally anywhere after the Jadzia Worf marriage, and it would
yeah,
still fit. Yeah.
and it would absolutely work. So
Actually,
it's
after them dating would still be fine, honestly. But keep going. Sorry.
yeah, well, just all of it to say that there's nothing in this episode that relies on anything else. So, but I just liked the running gag that Quark, Mr. Paranoid, Mr. He's the one who's got to track down the money, and he's so worried about his safety at one point and everything else. But everybody can pick the lock on his quarters. You know,
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
no problem with getting in. Laurel does it with ease. The two brothers, and then Hayne when it's his turn, of
Right.
course. So it's just like, what's stopping anybody from coming in there and murdering that guy? You know,
Quark should have enough enemies that he definitely should be worried about that.
right? You should still be worried about Haggith from when he did that weapons deal.
Yeah.
And if you can get into his quarters that easily, geez,
Right.
nothing's stopping anybody.
On that point, I'll say that is the one thing that kind of that is a part. It fits nicely with the one thing about this episode that I thought was didn't I don't know the idea that Quark was so easily kind of convinced, it seems, by each version of who he was. Like, yes, he does mention that he doesn't trust Laurel, I think is her name.
Mhm.
Yeah, he doesn't trust her. He likes Umox, when he gets his ears rubbed, and she's willing to do it. Um, and we can tell that they've probably been intimate after she first shows up. But part of me was surprised that like when the brothers show up, he didn't have some sort of backup plan. Uh, like I would just figure that Quark is supposedly supposed to be this kind of devious, brilliant mastermind of a sort, and he doesn't really get out of this because he figures it out. He gets out of it because he jumps in the box just in time, and Odo shows up to save the day, which is fine on some level. But part of me wishes that he had like it was some sort of Ocean's 11 type
Yeah,
twist at the
yeah,
end where
I
he turns
understand.
out he's been
Yeah.
working. There's like at the end of Ocean's 11, they revealed to the audience how they did the heist after the heist was done. Like I wish there was some sort of reveal of how Quark got himself out of it. Um, I feel like it was a
Yeah,
lost opportunity for Quark.
it it was because I feel like this one kind of fell back on a beat that we've already covered a lot with Quark, and showing that he is not that way, which is they wanted this to be kind of a typical greedy Ferengi story. The moment that he
Right,
heard about 1,000 bricks of gold pressed latinum, he became all consumed with getting his hands on it to the
right,
point of his own detriment. He's ignoring his friends. He's playing Tongo with Jadzia, and she's warning him that something about it doesn't seem right. But he is just still kind of focusing more on just the money because even when he's making deals, like Laurel's, he promises her 20%, and he gives Nasik and his brother 40% and so forth.
right,
He's still convinced that he's going to somehow come away with something. And even when Hayne tells him, oh no, it's all going back, but we can work out a deal and you can get some kind of reward, he again is immediately mollified and is like, okay, well, I'll take the reward. Like he's so focused on making sure he has some kind of payout that they miss an opportunity here to once again elevate Quark to kind of a different standard, which was
right,
what we've been seeing with Quark all along. As much as he likes to protest that he is a traditional Ferengi, he's really not. And he does a lot of things which show a level of what savvy acumen that we don't really see in the other typical Ferengi, that
right,
we've seen, throughout Deep Space Nine. So the
right,
fact that they kind of went away from that and gave us a story where it's this kind of one beat doesn't work. Now, I think that the reason they did that was because they were trying to give us something that was a little bit lighter, a bit more humorous. But again, that's something that doesn't fit with the overall theme that we've had going in season 6, which is a darker, more complex show.
right,
So I feel like there was a lot of competing views here, and people were trying to, they're like, we need something a bit more lighthearted. And it's like, why? You don't stay with your theme and, keep elevating your characters and giving them the complexity they need. And I get it. Quark's not a soldier. He's not in Starfleet. So wanting to use him as our little bit of levity here makes a little bit of sense, but at the same time, you're dealing with a serious matter, and you've got these would-be killers
Right.
floating around. So keeping it a serious story and showing that Quark is besides, I'm not gonna say he's not greedy, but besides being greedy, he's also clever. He's cunning. He knows how to, hedge his bets and play the odds and get people to kind of come around to his way of thinking. He's persuasive. He's a businessman. Show him being this persuasive salesman and doing these other things to kind of get them to either accept less or tell on themselves
Right.
and get themselves in trouble without totally implicating him. But for some reason, they decided to go a different route with it. And from what I understand, I am not in single company here. I know that Armin Shimmerman, he plays Quark. He also agreed with that sentiment, and he thought this episode was kind of poorly executed on the part for Quark. Felt like they did him a disservice a little bit here by making the character so focused on the money, the greed aspect, and not doing some other things. So,
Right.
and he also didn't like the fact that it was about Morn, who's really not even in the episode. So
Oh, he was just a plot device. That's fine.
yeah,
That's fine.
yeah, but he didn't agree with that either. So, um, but I mean, we still have something that is it's still overall enjoyable to watch. But as you said, there are some missing things here, some missed opportunities that could have made this a different episode and probably a better episode if they had played to the strengths we'd already seen them cultivating in Quark, rather than trying to throw us back to kind of almost like a season one, season two Quark that we weren't really familiar that much with.
Yeah, yeah, that's basically my point, and I think I kind of said that by saying it feels like in some ways you've seen this kind of episode before. The one episode that stands out in my mind, which has a very similar problem, is the one where his brother, I'm sorry, his cousin. What's his cousin's name?
Gala, the one that owns the moon,
Cousin, yeah, cousin Gala. And you mentioned that episode where that's the weapons deal that he
Haggith.
helps
Hmm.
Haggith, yeah. And he gets out of it at the last moment by he gets a crisis of conscience, and he manages to pull out a last minute sort of get out of the problem kind of thing. In
Yeah,
that
he
episode
makes
it
them. He
works.
makes them. They, if I remember correctly, they implicate themselves, right? Like they tell on
Yeah.
themselves in that one.
Well, he
And
convinces each side that they need to go down and look at the product in the bay, and it turns out his cousin is showing the warlord while he brings down the rebellion side, and they have a giant shootout in the middle of the cargo bay.
yeah,
Anyway,
that's right. And that leads to Odo
Gala
arresting
also,
everybody.
yeah, and Gala also getting arrested. So anyway, my point is that that one it felt like Cork was having to work like think on the fly. He knew he was in trouble and he was having the crisis of conscience. This episode would have, I think, worked better if it turns out that Quark has been in these situations before. We know he has. He's had to deal with unsavory characters, and he actually has kind of a way of doing things almost of like this is how he manages to escape being caught. Maybe it turns out that he knows how to use Odo. Like we find out that he knows how to play Odo just right in these scenarios. Because Odo does show up a time or two in this episode, of course.
Yeah,
Um,
and it almost is the same thing here. Odo, in that episode with Haggith and Gala, Odo ultimately is the one who, puts things together and arrests everyone. And the
right.
same is true here. His constant vigilance of Quark, is what's got, because like the whole episode is Odo kind of almost Batman-esque,
Yes.
existing in the shadows and
Right.
appearing and just getting just enough information
Right.
to, be there when Quark ultimately needed him, which
Right.
was the ending
Like
here.
here's just a brilliant thing I would have loved. I wish there was a moment where Cork looked down. He was serving drinks, and he brought over 4 cups, right, or 5 because he's the fifth, and he notices a sixth cup has suddenly appeared, and this time he's the one who notices and doesn't say anything and
Doesn't
just
say a
lets it
word.
happen.
Yeah, that would've and that would've been a great callback to, earlier
Season
season 2.
one,
Yeah, season
season
1,
oh
season
no,
2,
was it season
where,
2 or yeah, yeah.
it was
I think it's season
season
one where like the glass bottle gets broken and it turns out it was Odo, and he like forms back together. I think that
Right.
was like one of the first episodes. But
Yeah,
anyway,
because yeah,
it would have
but
been a
yeah, that
great
would have been a
callback.
great callback to that, and it's not the first time or the last time that he's done it. So it would have been great that once again, and that's something that Odo, not Odo, but Quark has accused Odo of doing a couple of times throughout other seasons. What were you this time? The chair, the desk, the what? So to have that callback again would have also just kind of highlighted the fact that Odo is always watching him and is always either trying to get him or help him, and especially after their whole crash landing and having to climb up the mountain and all that kind of stuff, to see that they kind of develop this grudging support of
Respect.
each other would have been a great little element to
Yeah,
see here too. So yeah, again, missed beats, missed moments here,
yeah,
which could have made the episode a bit better. So
right.
um, but again, hindsight is 2020 here, of course.
Yeah,
And
true.
we're reviewing an episode that was 30 years old, and we've seen a lot of other TV and movies. We've read a lot of books and whatever else. So we're kind of a bit more informed on that. Plus, you know, we're not. They had so many time crunches they have to deal with in getting out 24 episodes a season.
Hmm.
Now,
Hmm.
before we end everything, we have to give a little bit of attention to gold pressed platinum.
Yeah,
We've
for
heard
sure.
it talked about multiple times in multiple ways, but what exactly is it and why is it so valuable? So we see the scene where, again, Quark is playing Tonga with Jadzia, and he picks up those two little slips of
Yes,
platinum and he clinks them together and they have a very distinct sound. And then later
metallic,
on,
basically. Yeah,
yeah, and then we later on we see him with the giant bricks of gold that he thinks is gold plus platinum, and when he hits them together, they kind of just
thunk.
clunk together.
Yep.
No metallic tinkering or whatever that comes out of that.
Right.
And so we know that there is an element to it that when mixed with gold, it produces this seemingly more melodic note. But we really don't know much about what gold pressed latinum or what latinum is. It's pressed into the gold. How that's how it gets its name, gold pressed latinum.
Right.
And we know that it comes in several different denominations. You've got
Right.
the slips, you've got the strips, you've got bars, you've got bricks, and then you have like a massive, chunk as well.
Right.
So there is no like full on definition of what latinum is. The only thing that they really tell us about it is that it is a material that it has any number of uses. It's been highly valued by the Cardassians and the Ferengi for almost as long as either one of those can think of being civilizations.
Right.
It is a natural resource that can be mined in certain areas. A lot of planets don't have any kind of deposits of the material on their planet, and it's one of few natural resources that cannot be replicated, which again explains its overall value. You
Right.
have to mine it. It's rare in the areas where you can mine it, and also apparently the mining process itself is difficult.
Tedious. Yeah.
Yeah, very difficult. So
Right.
all those things combined, of course, make it a very, a treasured item and an easy thing to use for currency because it can be transported so many different locations,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So that's how that works, and then we see an example of it when Morn regurgitates it from his second stomach, and it's this very viscous silvery mercury almost looking
Yeah.
liquid.
100%.
But it certainly moves a bit differently than mercury. I've seen mercury kind of moves more like water, it's just silver. This had definitely a more um
Viscous
syrupy
was the right
yeah,
word. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Syrupy. Yep.
syrupy consistency than anything else, and apparently it doesn't take much to make a, what did he say, brick, because
Wow.
he spits out, maybe I would have think that amount that Morn regurgitates is maybe an ounce to 2 ounces
That's what I
tops.
said. Yeah. When I was in the
Yeah,
recap. Yeah. I was like, that
yeah.
is not much.
Right, and Quark picks it up and he says there must be
100.
100 bars. So
Yeah.
those, and again, we saw an example of bars earlier when he got the one from the storage locker, and
Yep.
then the other ones when they showed
The
up in that
crate, I guess is
giant
probably the
crate.
right word. Yeah.
So he's saying there were 100 of those bars worth in
An ounce.
that that glass that
Yeah.
Morn gave him. So obviously the concentration of this stuff is also another reason for its extreme value. But we also know that it must also have some kind of toxic property to it as well, since Morn's been keeping it in his stomach and it's caused his hair to fall out. I mean, I would imagine any concentration of a mineral like that in you is not good.
Yeah, I thought that explanation at
You
the
know,
end was frankly a bit bad. When Cork asked him like, "Where is it? Where'd it go?" I thought Morn was about to gesture to the bar and be like, "I've spent it over the years here. You have it already, basically." And then he goes to spit it out. I was like, "What the hell? Oh, okay." But he's like, "That's why your hair fell out." I'm like, "Homeboy, if you had a metal in your stomach, even if your second stomach, that would do some
which
serious damage. Let's be real."
they have this, the realm of suspension of belief there, as they
Yeah.
say, which we don't know much about Morn's people and what they can tolerate. Star Trek is famous for having groups of aliens that can handle extremes of a lot of stuff, that would kill anyone else.
Right.
So, this is not necessarily beyond the realm of them doing that again here
Right.
for the sake of this character. But I too agree with you. I would have loved to seen him like do that whole look around and then he gestures to something that we as the audience have seen every day and didn't realize that it was absolutely coded in latinum, something as simple as like the deck plating that everybody walks over every day, not realizing it's full of latinum,
Right.
or the paint itself is laced with latinum or whatever, and he's just been every time he comes in here, he puts a little bit somewhere, a little, wherever,
Right.
something else that would have made it again a long running joke, but it's clear that that wasn't something that they had really, thought a lot a whole lot about. So I give him credit for still coming up with something that was still unique to Mourn.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. While you were talking just now, I was looking at the actors who were in this episode, and the guy who played Hane, I thought I recognized him. He was is
Hmm.
Gregory Itzin, and he was the guy I thought he was. He was the one who showed up in the episode Dax to take her because her previous form of Curzon
Curzon.
had an
Hmm.
affair with, I think, his mother
With his
or
mother,
something. And
and
yeah,
then
anyway,
was accused of killing his father, and that's why they were coming to arrest
that's what
Judson
it
in the
was.
first place.
I knew I recognized him as soon as he
Hmm.
showed up. And anyway, did you
He's
know
a
who he was
I
right
yeah,
away?
I didn't know who he was right away, but he's one of those people that, again, he's a character actor, so he pops up a lot in shows, and Star Trek has a history of recycling people. He shows up here, I believe he's in Voyager as well
Uh huh.
as a character or two.
Yeah,
I don't think he was ever in Next Generation, but I definitely know for sure that he was in Deep Space Nine and Voyager.
I do
So
see
yeah.
him listed as being in Voyager, the episode Critical Care as Dr. Dizek.
Yes, and that's an interesting episode where their whole medical system is run by a computer, and the computer program decides who is worthy of critical care.
Uh
And
huh.
so there's like a whole scores of people in the population who are dying because the algorithm says they're worthless.
Right.
Meanwhile, like the top one percenters, it's an allegory for that. The top
Right.
one percenters are getting
Getting
all the
everything.
best treatment,
Yeah.
right? And there's like this drug that could cure a bunch of people of this plague that's ravaging half of the society, but that same drug makes the other people youthful and revitalized and they
Mm,
live longer and they don't have any other health conditions, but it just makes them appear younger and thinner and healthier, so they hoard it all for them
right.
while the rest of the population dies. And so yeah, that's what that episode's about.
And apparently he was also on Enterprise as well.
Yes, he was also playing a military-esque
Admiral Black
character.
and Captain Sopek in two separate episodes, it looks
Yeah.
like. But yeah,
So
anyway, when I saw him show up, I was like, I know I've seen this guy before, and I'm pretty sure it was that character. So I'm glad I confirmed it just now, because he just stood out so clearly. And then I feel like one of the guys playing the green aliens, even through his mask, his like the older, taller brother, the one who did most of
Mhm.
the talking, I felt like he like if you showed me the actor's face, I'd recognize him, but the
He's
Wikipedia entry doesn't have a picture of him.
he's got a very distinct way of talking, so
Yeah.
I get that why you would think that he would stand out because the way he talks, it makes him stand out. That kind of slow but menacing uh cadence that he's got. I found it a
Yeah.
little unusual.
Right. I
Yeah.
I just wish I could find a picture of him because I swear I would probably recognize him. But anyway, so yeah, the one other thing we should probably quickly talk about just for fun is it
Mhm.
turns out that Dax and Worf both had a pretty close relationship with Morn that we hadn't learned
Mhm.
about until just now. Um,
That's correct.
yeah, should we?
Jadzia had what, dated Mourn
No, she had a
briefly.
crush on him, but he
Crush
turned
on
her down. I think is what happened.
Yes, Mourn turned Jadzia down. That is correct, because Worf was quite upset when he found out that not only did she have a crush on him, but that Mourn had said no. And then we find out that Mourn and Worf frequently spar together,
Yes,
and Worf found him to be quite competent.
right. Yeah, which I thought was just hilarious because again, the whole idea of the character is that there's so much detail about him that we as the audience don't ever get to know. It's a brilliant sort of teasing the audience sort of way of doing things of like, oh, don't you guys wish you knew? Let me put it this way. I imagine if they really wanted to keep this going is like maybe there's a book series like the adventures of Morn or something
You
like that.
know, I think that there are a few books that are dedicated to Morn, and he's a much more active character
Right.
in the books. And then, of course, since you've never heard his voice, you get to make one up for him
Yes.
yourself as you read it. I'll double check on that and see what I can find for you because they do offer a lot. There's a lot, by the way, if you are interested at all and you want more Trek than what's out there,
Right.
go and look up the books, especially the books that came out in I think they really started in like the late 70s, and then they had like a fantastic run and an explosion in the latter half of the 80s and then through the mid 90s. And I
I'm
mean,
sure.
I'm not saying like a little bit or whatever, but I'm saying like thousands of books were
Mm,
printed during this time. Just
right.
thousands of books, and there are so many that are based upon each series. The only series I would say don't read or at least look past initially would be the ones for the Deep Space Nine crew that started around the same time that the show started. The reason being, a lot of those books, like they absolutely took off.
Right.
So by the time that you actually will get into reading, like I think it starts around really the fourth book in the series, it diverges so much from what we've already established on the show. They don't make any sense. So
Yeah.
if you go too far down that rabbit hole, it's almost like reading a completely different show
Mirror
because those
Universe Part 2.
right, because those characters are completely different from how they're portrayed later on the
Yeah.
show. Because obviously the show is restricted by number of episodes, and then they have their off seasons and breaks in between and all other kind of stuff. So the books kind of go in a completely different direction for a little bit. They do try to like correct their ship and bring them back in a couple of times, but it it
It
doesn't work.
yeah.
It really doesn't, and it makes for a very confused series. But thankfully, they stopped that line. And then they started again with kind of doing it in the same formula that they were doing the TNG series books, which was they kind of just picked up in like the middle of season 5, I think, and they start doing like in between the books are based on things that could have happened in between episodes, so it's a lot easier than for them to kind of stay on course because nothing directly references
The overall
something
plot
else that
of the
would
show. Yeah.
throw them off, and it's always solved by the time
The
they
book
need to get
ends.
back for the next episode or whatever. So they were much better there, but it's very tricky. So I would just say when you find them, like book number 1 in the DS9 series, just skip it,
Yeah.
and then kind of I think it's like I'll go back into because I went through these a while ago, but I think it's like maybe book 40 they kind of get back on track and start doing things better.
Book 40.
Yeah. Like I'm saying, there was like a massive explosion of these books, you
Oh, I
know.
don't doubt it. Yeah.
There's so many of them, and then they slowed down a bit on the books for all of them, and then in 2001 they started releasing these. Um, I don't know what to call them. These they were just like great novels that were based off of either the TNG crew or the DS9 crew or the whatever, and they were like a limited release novel series. So this one would be 3 books, this one would be 5 books, this one, another 3 books or whatever, and they each had a particular theme. There is a series of these from the Next Generation crew that follows directly after the last movie, Nemesis. They're great. They're
Mm,
absolutely great books. And I mean, you know how Picard is 30 years later, right?
right.
These books kind of fit in there. It's like that first 15 years
Mhm,
after Nemesis and
right.
what everybody's up to and who's wearing whatever else. They are great books, and it gives you so much like what happened with Worf after he was done on Deep Space Nine and kind of went back for a couple of missions with the crew of the Enterprise and them staying together. What happens with Riker and Troy and who's on the Enterprise, and even what happened to Wesley Crusher's in there. And there's a whole arc about him that will throw you off so bad, but they're very well done. And
Yeah.
they all have a title like A Time to Stand, A Time to Die, A Time for Rebirth, A Time for, like, so just look for those. And I think there's 5 in that series.
Okay.
Great books. So check those out if you're looking for a recommendation.
So the reason I know you are not at all lying about like the number of books in Star Trek Expanded Universe, um, I used to work at a bookstore, and so I definitely remember seeing stuff like that. And Star Wars definitely is the same way. They
Oh yeah.
developed their own. They had their own expanded universe, and part of what Disney did, which is actually apparently turning out to bite them in the butt really hard, they decided that the Star Wars extended universe was all non-canon in order to make room for their new movies. And throughout all of these plots and stuff they've been building up for years, Admiral Thrawn being apparently one of the characters that was like, who was basically the successor to Darth Vader in the falling empire. Like, who was the guy who like kept things going after Darth
Hmm.
Vader and the others had all been killed. Anyway, but just just this past week, I haven't been playing the game, but there's a new game out called Space Marine 2. It's part of the Warhammer 40K universe, and I've always been, well, in the last several years at least, I've been always a little bit more and more interested in learning about 40K just because
Hmm.
it's has so much lore that if you ever like, if you just dip your little toe in the lore for 40K, the ripple that generates out is so big.
Oh,
There's
I
so
know,
much.
I know exactly what you're talking about. I
Yeah, and there, like, I went on Amazon just to like look up the books because I remember looking the books at the bookstore, seeing them, and as a kid didn't really know much about them. But and then like I just wanted to find like one book, and I found out it's a part of like 60.
Yeah, you know,
And that's
the,
just like one plot line. Like one plot line has 60 books
yep,
attached to it. Yeah.
yep.
Anyway.
There is a yeah, so 2 things. There is a series of books in the Star Trek pantheon that are all about Jean-Luc Picard and him becoming a captain. So,
Mm,
as you may be aware, Jean-Luc Picard was the youngest person made captain up to a certain point. Then we find out someone else gets that title a little bit later. But since he was made captain so early, he stayed a captain and never moved on from the ship for like 20 years. So like he became
right.
the captain of the Stargazer, and then he was like captain of the Stargazer at like 25, I think, 23, 25, whatever. And then he stayed captain for like the next 25, 30 years up
Right.
until the ship was finally lost and he moves on to the Enterprise. So then there's this whole series of books that's all about him being
And that's
the
enough
young
time to
captain.
like
Yeah, and it does. So I did that. I was like, "You know what? When I found out that they had some of these books, it's like, let me just take a look. I wanna just see." And I found a couple, and I will give them credit for a series that's about something that we only ever just heard mentioned a few times on the show. These books are incredibly detailed. They've got some great characters in them, and I read the first couple, and I was like, "These are great." And I said, "Let me go look up the rest of them. I just wanna see how many."
and
There were
a
like
and a
there were like 40 books.
and a
There was
wall fell on you.
right, and I was like, "When did you guys have time to develop that?" And, like, I never heard about it. And
Right.
then they've done this with so many other captains. Like, there's a captain called, Captain Mackenzie Calhoun, and he is this, kind of roguish captain, and the most distinguishing feature that I can tell you about him that I remember anyway is that for some reason, he's got purple eyes. I've never read the book to discover why he has purple eyes. I don't know if it's like because of his race or whatever, but he's presented as being otherwise human. So there's part of it. It could be that he looks human, but is actually something else, kind of like how betazoids look like humans, but are whatever. And
Right.
then, but there also is an element of something could have happened to him. And so I was going to look into it and like just see where the series fell. But again, there's like 100 books that are all dedicated to this character and his crew and everything else. And I was like, I don't have time. Like I don't have time for 100 books. And that's just for him alone. To
Yeah.
say nothing of all the stuff that gets they have like there's whole sections
Right.
of stories that are just for like Dr. Crusher or
Right.
for Worf or for Riker. There's the weird crossover ones. There's a crossover series that deals with how the Enterprise crew crosses over with the X-Men. Don't know how it happens, but I know there's a whole series that's all about it. Um, there's all kinds. There's a one where the original series crew crosses over with Doctor Who. I know they did a limited release of novels for that, and then that was later turned into a series of comic books. So you can go and look at that. And then lately, there was a whole other series that was developed where all the crews mix across time and space, and of course Q is involved, but all the crews, Kirk, Spock and company, Picard and Riker, Janeway, Cisco, the Discovery crews, like all of them are together and having to work together and stuff. Yeah, so again, there's a lot is the
Yeah.
point. So if
Right.
you're looking for more Trek, if you feel like you don't have enough somehow, go check out the
Uh,
books and the comics and the whatever because it's a whole other world of stuff. And real quick to my other point I was going to make, because you were talking about Warhammer. As much of a nerd as I proudly claimed myself to be, I feel like I've only got one franchise in me.
right.
I
Right.
can't
Right.
do
Right. Yeah.
another
Oh, I
as
know
much as I
exactly
would
what you're
want to.
saying. Yeah.
you
Like
know,
you're the Star Trek guy. Some other guy could be the Warhammer guy, but you're
yes.
Star Trek.
I know just enough about all of them that if we wanted to have
Yeah.
a general conversations about them, I could. But if
Right.
you wanted to get into the lore, I'm out. Unless we're talking about Trek, I can go deep on the Trek stuff with you at any time. But Star
Right.
Wars, Warhammer, and those, I'm out. I've got nothing. I
Yeah.
don't have the time. I don't
Right.
have the ability for that,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
I'm not kidding. The series, the Warhammer series, like I was reading through like just some of the quick plot summaries on Amazon, and like it was like 10 books in before it finally got to the part where I was like, "Oh, I thought I was asking for this." It's like 10 books down. Like, "Oh my god." Part of me is like, I mean, I have so many other things to read that I couldn't get to it, but if I like had the time, like just to be the guy, just to like, I'm gonna commit.
Oh,
I'm gonna be the one who does it.
I tried with Halo. When Halo first came out as a game, they released a couple of books that were with it, and I read both books,
Right,
and then I was like, okay, I'm gonna this is gonna be my next series. I'll commit to this,
right,
and I swear, like I think I just like got sick or something. I don't
right,
know, but the next time I went back to check, there were 13 books. And then from 13 there were 40, and then from 40 there were 60, and then there were comic books, and there's like limited release series and whatever else. And before I knew it, we were 25 years in. There's over like 200 based Halo based books, plus the comics, plus they've done a couple of live action shorts and
Hmm.
and stuff like that. And I'm like, there's just no way I'd be able to
Right.
get through
Right.
all of it.
And I
But it's
remember those books coming out too. I
yeah,
remember you talking about, yeah.
but it's amazing. Like I love the way that some of it explodes and they do these things. But
Yeah.
then of course somebody always comes around inevitably and like ruins it. Like that terrible Halo show was just an abomination. So but yeah, and I mean to say nothing of this is the kind of beat that we see with the DC stuff, the Marvel stuff, all of it. They all kind of do the same thing. So this is the sci-fi stuff is nothing new in that
Yeah.
regard.
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure. But yeah, it's still great to hear that there's all that great
Oh
content,
yeah.
and it's fan made most of the time. It's like these
Yeah.
are the people who really cared and actually, like you and I doing this. They should have done that. Well, boom, there's a guy who actually did the thing and wrote a book.
That's absolutely true. That's almost exactly it. If you feel like somebody should have done something or they could have done it, if you look hard enough, you'll find it. I remember in particular about Next Generation, because it's a paramilitary force, right? And it's based off of a lot of Earth cultures. I remember one time in high school, I said how it would be really cool if they had at some point done a trek that was heavily influenced by like the Roman Empire, right? Like just to see what that would be, that slightly different militaristic look or whatever. And I talked about it and talked about it and talked about it. And like 10 years later, I found a book that was exactly that. And there was a whole crew that they were in command of a Galaxy class starship, just like the Enterprise D, but the entire crew were basically, it was as if for them, the Roman Empire never fell, and
Mm,
so they had won their autonomy from Earth. They had settled elsewhere. They had eventually joined the Federation, but they had gotten several different contingencies as part of their joining of the Federation. And one of them was this ship, this crew, and them doing things kind of their way. So
right.
while they still abided by Federation rules and regulations and Starfleet, whatever else, the way they implemented things had a definite more
Roman
Roman
feel.
militaristic
Mm.
tone to things, and so they end up in the book, they end up running afoul of Picard and company, and Picard's having to kind of reason with the captain, and it doesn't go over very well because the captain again, he's like Centurion this, and he's it. It was a great read. It was a very fascinating read, but at the same time I was reading it, I was going, someone stole my idea. Like in my head, that's what I just kept saying over and over because I was like, I know I had said this. I was like,
Yeah.
someone was listening to me and wrote this,
Right.
But yeah, so it's there. Again, if you think about it, with the number of books that are out there, it's there somewhere.
Right.
It's there.
Right.
So
Right. Ah, man.
what well, I think that will just about do it for us on this episode. We did run a little bit over, but not too bad. No new Trek updates as of this time. They're still running full steam ahead with the Section 31 movie and then the Star Trek um, Starfleet Academy TV show. There have been no new updates on either of those fronts yet, other than to just say they're still going. Um, one little bit of news. There has been some forward movement on a show following the events of Picard, which would feature Jerry Ryan and those Michelle Hurd and some of those characters that kind of popped up towards the end there. They and that's just say forward movement, and I think they've had a few more talks. Nothing has been greenlit, no contracts have been signed, none of that. It's just they have said there has been another round of talks. I know that Paramount is in like huge free fall right now. They've had so many changes over there. A bunch of people in the upper echelons of leadership have been completely removed. I know a lot of intellectual property has been sold to other streaming companies like Netflix, Amazon, Hulu. They've all kind of got their chunk. So a lot of these things are holding up other potential deals because of whatever was going on that has caused them to suddenly want to get rid of people and sell things. Were they close to bankruptcy? Don't know. Don't see how that was possible considering they had so many, fires going for a while there. But that's it. That's the only thing I can tell you for right now. So stay tuned. I'll keep looking. Hopefully everything continues to go well, at least for those two projects we know are continuing, and then we can, see where they come out on the legacy one. I think the legacy one would be a great show for them to do, but I can understand them wanting to hold off considering Strange New Worlds is still going really strong. And having two shows on can really, mess up your ratings for the one that is already proven to be a success.
Right.
And that was kind of the issue when Strange New Worlds and Discovery were going on at the same time.
Right.
So I get it if they want to hold off at least until probably the Strange New Worlds hits maybe like a season 5 or a season 6, then maybe kind of greenlighting something else, especially considering again the movie and the other show are there. So we'll see. We'll see where they go with things. But other than that, I think that we're pretty much done. Do you have any other final thoughts? Anything you want to throw out there?
Yeah, I think we definitely said a lot tonight. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, guys, that's going to do it for us for this one. Next week is going to be a great episode. It is one of my absolute favorite
Oh
episodes.
no, don't tell me
Um,
that.
yes, it is called. Sorry, David. It's called Far Beyond the Stars, and it's a favorite episode of mine because it wasn't always a favorite episode of mine. I can actively remember a
Oh.
time when I didn't like this episode,
Oh.
and then through viewing and through life experience, it changed. So I can't wait to kind of get into that with you all next week. So
Wow.
go and watch
Okay.
it, be prepared to discuss it, and don't worry if you don't like it. I'm not going to hate you. I'll just mute you and I'll talk to everyone else as to why the episode is great. And you can just sit there and watch.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
All right, guys. Well, that'll do it for us on this episode. As always, you can find us and follow us anywhere you happen to do your social medias. Facebook is going to be the best if you would like to reach out to us and ask us any questions or leave any comments or anything like that. You can listen to us anywhere you happen to listen to podcasts. I do it on Spotify. Don't forget, we are going to be running a little bit behind on the releasing of the actual podcast episodes, but never fear, they're all coming. So until next week, guys, take care of yourselves.